Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to A Real Point of View. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be there visually, having a little computer difficulty, but I'm here with my good friends and co-conspirators here as the critics on the internet, Ms. Karen D.
Hello,
and
hello.
Mr. Stephen C., who doesn't pick a bad movie, and Ms. Karen D., the movie maven herself. So, welcome and thanks for joining us here on A Real Point of View. We're getting started a little late, having, as I alluded to, some computer difficulties, but hopefully you'll hang around, stick around with us as we talk swashbucklers this week. Um, to live and die by the sword is pretty much our theme, and we looked at some films that both old and new that pretty much discuss the subject of um, swashbuckling era, um, swordplay in the movies. And we've tried to find some really unique movies, different movies than we normally would maybe come up with. And so we're going to share those with you today. So I'll go ahead and get started. The two movies that I thought about with regard to this genre of swordplay was a movie that I was actually inspired by to find by a song, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. And they say Scaramouche. And I found this movie called Scaramouche. And Scaramouche is basically about a man who's trying to avenge the death of his friend who was killed by a master swordsman. So he's got to do what he can to try to become a master swordsman himself because he's not right away. So he does all this to try to avenge his friend. And the name of the movie is Scaramouche. Scaramouche is a character in this film that is part of a traveling theater. And this character in general has most of the theater wears masks during their performances. It's kind of a comedic, kind of a broad, what's the word, vaudeville style in the theatrics, and they wear masks. But the guy who's plays Scaramouche is so hideously unattractive under the mask that he wears the mask all the time, so as not to scare people. He's a very talented actor and performer, but sadly, he's a scary guy. Well, what happens is the main star of the picture, who is Stuart Granger, who's trying to avenge his friend's death, is trying to get away from the army people who are after him. So he happens upon this theater who his one of his love interests is one of the players, and he bumps into this guy, takes his disguise so that no one can see what he looks like. So throughout the film, he's trying to learn how to be a better fencer, and so that he can come up against this swordman who's a master swordman in the area. And this takes place basically in Paris, France. And oh, Karen, you speak French, don't you?
On peut.
Ah, see.
Je parle un peu.
And Steve speaks French too, I think. I think he says French fries. What else he speaks there?
Words that cannot be discussed upon this show.
Okay, so there you go.
Wow.
So that's so that's the French from my cohorts here. But basically, this film is a revenge film and a romance film. It stars Stuart Granger and Janet Leigh, and it's a Eleanor Parker. I mean, it's a really, really decent film depicting the 18th century Paris, France. Um, and um, what I really liked about the film was Stuart Granger, pretty decent actor uh, back in the 50s and in the early 60s. Um, his athleticism in this film and his ability to use a sword in this film, I thought was pretty, really, really, really good. And totally enjoyed it for that. Basically, the essence of the film is his friend is a libertarian. These guys are trying to go against the rule of the time, and his friend puts out a pamphlet to rouse the those people to try to get into revolution. And he's found out, and one of the people who finds him out is the person who actually kills him. So this movie has a lot of twists and turns. Um, but uh, Stuart Granger's character sees his friend die, and knowing that his friend was coaxed into the duel, to the death, and so he vows vengeance on the person who killed him. The really cool thing about this particular film is, in the twists and turns, his relationship with Janet Leigh starts out romantic and then becomes less when he finds out that Janet Leigh is actually his sister. And this is because he finds out that throughout his life, he was estranged from his family. So he's been living off a dowry for years, not knowing why it was cut off. So he's also, in the midst of trying to learn how to sword fight, he's also trying to find about his identity, about his youth. And then he ends up um, going with her to her father's house when he thinks he's um, in the midst of trying to be romantic, and comes to find out it's the same place that he was going to in the first place. And the person who's there is on their deathbed. And so he's never really met his father, so he doesn't know that, but he realizes that the young woman who he thought he was trying to romance is actually his sister. So he obviously stays in a good relationship, but obviously um, uh, shies away from any type of other relationship with her and doesn't want her to know that he's her older brother.
Well, thanks for
Um,
clearing that part up.
yeah. Well, that's not even the only twist. I'm not going to spoil the total movie, but there's some more twists having to do with family in this film as well. Um, this was actually a pretty good film, guys. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know um, what I was going to get when I saw the name Scaramouche, and it reminded me of the song by Queen, the Bohemian Rhapsody. I thought, it was kismet that I was going to be watching this film. And I'm glad I did take a look at this film. It's really a pretty good film. My other film that I'll talk about later in the show is Troy, which stars Eric Bana and Brad Pitt. So why don't we go into you guys, bring my co-hosts into this, and what movies they saw and what they thought about those films. Why don't we start with you, Karen? What films did you come across that were, if not swashbuckling, quote unquote, dealt with the sword?
Well, I picked two movies, and I went a long way around the mulberry bush to land on these movies because I was trying to avoid the obvious swashbuckling sword fighting movies. Um, and a lot of these movies are movies that I like because I grew up watching these movies, and they're some of my favorite movies. But I wanted to avoid the obvious Robin Hood, Captain Blood, the Seahawk, um, you know, um,
All the Errol Flynn stuff, right?
right, or the Scarlet Pimpernel, Zorro, the movies like that. I mean, that's like shooting fish in a barrel. So it's like, so I was trying to find a movie that had been done, later, and a movie, but that was not Pirates of the Caribbean, and a movie that was done earlier that wasn't those classic movies like The Three Musketeers, The Four Musketeers, whatever, that are just very, very obvious choices. So, so the first movie that I came across was a movie called Captain Horatio Hornblower. It was filmed in 1951 with Gregory Peck, Virginia Mayo, and a British cast of various people. But anyway, the movie was about this captain who takes on the Spanish and the French um, as he pursues world domination on behalf of the British Navy, in a nutshell. Because that's what the Brits did in the 1700s. And I picked this because this movie showed up on a number of swashbuckling movie lists. However, I have to say, there's only one swashbuckling fight in the movie. So it's like there's not that much swashbuckling that goes on. I wanted to do this movie because I saw this movie as a young child, and it was one of my favorite movies. It's probably the first movie I ever saw with Gregory Peck, and I just loved this movie. So I'm watching it today and I'm thinking to myself, what did I like about this movie? Because I don't, what what was so captivating? Because I'm kind of at a loss to remember what that was. Because it had like the sappy love story between he and Virginia Mayo, which completely sapped the energy in the middle of the movie. It's like, yawn, can we move past this? Because I don't give a crap about, you want her, she wants you, she's married, she's engaged, you're married. I don't care about that. Can we get back to the sea? Can we get back to, fighting? And where's the Spaniard when you need one? So that was just
Because every film needs a Spaniard.
every film is a Spaniard. So that movie was just, the love story was a complete waste of time. And
Sure.
but the interesting part was just the way that Gregory Peck's character, Captain Hornblower, was just very savvy in terms of military strategy, and and his men loved him even though he was kind of gruff. But he was very smart, and so there was like this running joke of, they would bet that he would say something like, we're gonna see land in 2 days. So like, we're nowhere near land. We're gonna see land in 2 days. And so then a couple of the guys would do like a side bet. What do you bet we're gonna see land in 2 days? Oh, I'll bet you 10 guineas that we won't see land for 8 days. And of course that guy would always lose, and he would keep betting and keep losing. So that was kind of cute. And the one sword fight that was there, that did occur in the movie, occurred relatively early on, when uh, the the British took over the Spanish ship and this fight broke out, and so there was sword fighting. And Captain Hornblower was one of the sword fighters, and he kind of held his own. And one of the men said afterwards, "Oh, that was very good sword fighting, sir." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I kind of flunked fencing when I was in school, so I guess I did okay for somebody who almost flunked sword fighting in school." Um, the other thing that I noticed was that even though this movie was completely steeped in the British tradition, apparently Gregory Peck was such a big star, he didn't even need to try a British accent. He just, it's like,
Do you know
But
who I am?
his accent was kind of like that a little bit anyway. That's probably how he garnered the role. So, and I didn't realize, because I saw that movie as a child too, and I'm a very big fan of Gregory Peck. And if you watch this show at any point in time, you'll know that. So, are you saying pretty much, Karen, that this movie was kind of like Atticus Finch Goes to Sea?
yeah, it was kind of like Atticus Finch Goes to Sea, yes. Or To Kill a Mockingbird was like Captain Horatio Hornblower Goes to Trial. I don't know which.
I've seen
I am trying to imagine that, and it sounds fantastic.
We're a scout. Okay, anyway. Uh,
So I don't know. Not a lot of sword fighting. Nobody exemplified much in the way of sword fighting skill in this movie. I mean, it was very stock sword fighting. So I would not recommend this as a swashbuckling movie. But if you like military strategy, I'm like, well, go for it. It is entertaining, except for the love story, which is completely and utterly sappy.
all
So there
right.
you have it.
What about you, Steve? Why don't you give us your first go round?
I'm going to talk about a movie that we've had on the show multiple times whenever we bring up um, any kind of sword fighting, any kind of, I guess you'd say, against the odds style of movie. And that's The Seven Samurai. Uh, it's made in 1984, directed by Akira Kurosawa.
Yes, sir.
And this movie gives us so much toward the. It was made in 1954. It gives us so much after that, from the way the movie shot, from Kurosawa's directorial standpoint, and how much he influenced and inspired so many people after this movie. And that's not just in samurai style movies or any Japanese feudal movies, but just movies in general. Um, the Magnificent Seven, of course, we know is entirely based on the the premise of this movie, except set in a more Western tone. And the movie's about these villagers that they're always raided. They've been raided before, but they're raided by bandits who come and try and steal their crops. And they just happen to get word beforehand this time that of when they're going to be raided by the bandits coming to take their crops, and the bandits decide raid it yet. They're going to wait till the harvest comes in before they raid and take everything. And when the villagers get word of this, they decide to go out and they hire Ronin, which are masterless samurai, to defend the village. And since the village itself has no real money, they they have to go out and find hungry samurai. So that's where you really would stumble upon a Ronin, because samurai that are that have a master that are in good company are not really the hungry type. They don't really have to worry about it. So they find these seven men that are all just a little bit different, but you see through the movie, through their training, through their interactions, that these Ronin who don't really have much relation to each other, if any, they slowly start to see by the second act of the movie the bigger picture of what they're growing together to do, and coming in and truly understanding the purpose that they feel obligated and by the code, of what Bushido really is, that they would stand for these people and even die for these people so that they wouldn't have to worry about these bandits in the future, or worry about not making it to the next season, not being able to plant crops or move forward with their lives. And the action in this movie is good by today's standards. The shooting of this movie is still, you know, it's shown in film schools of things that you should and should not do when shooting a movie. They didn't do a traditional shot by shot method. They would have three cameras that they would coordinate, and during every scene, they would have to use diagrams to get the cameras in the right positions to make sure you got all the action of the scene and it stayed fluid. You didn't have to worry about retakes or somebody messing up the retake or doing it multiple times. The village that was built was authentic
Hmm.
and true to the style and the time. And I mean, it's samurai, so you're going to have every bit of the sword fighting that you really want to have in this kind of a movie. And we talk of great lengths about this movie, and we really go into dissecting um, just so many times about this movie. But
Yeah, it's one of my favorites also.
it's an amazing movie, and it should be on everybody's list of movies to see if they've never seen it. Um, it's amazing at the end of the movie. Spoiler alert if you haven't. At the end of the movie, where you see the samurai that are left looking over the villagers who are just ecstatic and with joy of being able to plant their crops again and be able to look forward to the next season, the next part of their
Harvest.
life where they
Mhm.
don't have, well, not just next season, next harvest, but the next point of their life where they don't have to worry about
Right.
about this problem coming back again, that they've been saved.
Hmm.
And it's an overall just an amazing movie. And you know, we talk about it so much, but its runtime is 207 minutes, so get ready to sit down and see a lot of sword swinging.
Oh my. God, that's
It's
almost 4 hours.
its original runtime was 207 minutes, and 50 minutes of the movie was cut out when it was originally shown to American audiences because they thought that nobody would sit around.
And they're
It's three
right.
hours. It's 3 hours. Well, I sat and watched the whole thing when I sat down for it, and I watched, after the full movie came out. So in 2002, a 203-minute version was re-released in the U.S. That's the one that I saw. So I didn't
Oh,
even see the full movie.
That's crazy, isn't
wow.
it?
Yeah, it's insane, but it's a great movie, and everybody should see it.
It's an excellent movie.
It
It's
It's
it it
an
groundbreaking
excellent movie.
today. It's still
it
groundbreaking.
makes
And it's
it
fascinating
makes
too.
it makes a lot of top 25, top 20 movie lists.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And it should.
I really like the correlation it made from the original film to the film that starred Yul Brynner, um, and the Magnificent Seven, and it was really interesting to see the parallels and how they stayed almost true to the original film, at least a lot of aspects of that film,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
and the Magnificent Seven I thought was a really good film. So the Seven Samurai by Kurosawa was amazing.
He
I really
he
enjoyed that film.
he was truly ahead of his time.
Yeah,
Indeed,
he really was.
very much so, very much so.
All
Awesome.
right.
Well, my
Good
next movie
choice.
that I have listed here came out basically in 2004, and it stars Eric Bana, Brad Pitt, Orlando Bloom, um, Peter O'Toole, uh, Diane Kruger. This movie is Troy. When I first, I guess as a kid growing up, I've always liked Greek mythology, um, um, the stories of Odysseus, stories of the Trojan horse, um, and of course, more popular films recent past, like the 300, talking about Greece. Well, I thought Troy was a pretty decent film. Now, talking about long runs, this movie was 2 hours and 45 minutes, approximately. So this too was a long film. Um, but the main characters in the film are quote unquote legends of like a Troy legend was uh, Hector, a great warrior for his people and in love with his country. And then a more or less mercenary person played by Brad Pitt in Achilles. And people, if you know anything about Greek history, Greek mythology, Achilles was quote unquote a demigod, half one of his parents was a god, so he has seen the gods and things like that. And he had one thing about him that was um, unique in that he could fight and not be injured because there was only one vulnerable spot on his body. So you have to take a look at the film to find out what that is. But basically, he was a fierce and methodical warrior. And the swordplay that Brad Pitt is shows in this film, I was actually taken aback by. I thought it was so good, considering especially in the era that this is in Greek mythology. So the essence of this is we have the Greek forces and the different Greek nations, more or less, trying to come together in a truce with Troy, so that they can start ending some of these wars and battles that they were having. So a lot of the Greek nations were coming together under one force and trying to make this truce. Now the sad thing about the film is that one of the main kings, will say, who's there to help secure this truce, his wife is a beautiful woman named Helen. And Paris, who is one of the Trojans, who is there to, as a diplomat, will say one of the princes of Troy, to try to help make peace, he is smitten by her. And their love affair causes a major war between these two factions. And so Paris takes Helen away from Paris. I mean, from the Greeks, and finds a way and gets her back to Troy. And so you've probably heard this in history and heard this being said. It was Helen of Troy now, and so they're keeping Helen there because of Paris's love, and Hector, who is the older brother, who is the more level-headed and the most notable warrior of this faction, does what he can to try to protect his brother, protect the situation, and protect his country. For him, his country and family are everything. For Paris, his love of Helen is everything. For Helen, her hatred of being the former wife, quote unquote, of one of the Greek kings, um, comes to fruition in this film, and the sheer anger and uh, uh, at the wife being taken, but also too the Greek, the primary Greek king, he wants everything. He's kind of a Napoleonic kind of ideology here. He wants to. Karen kind of mentioned it with the English. They want to rule the world, so they're trying to get um, take down every battle they can and build their empire. And Troy is in the way. Although they were trying to make peace with Troy, they're glad that there was something that caused a rift so they could come to Troy and take over Troy. But Brad Pitt as Achilles in this film, I thought was really, really good. You really fall in love with Hector's um, love and faith and courage, sadly to no avail in this film. But this is a really good film, and it's a lot of good swordplay. I was quite surprised by how good the swordplay was in this particular film. But yet, you're talking about massive armies against each other, and there's just horrific carnage in this film. But to see the strategic way that they fought in this close hand-to-hand combat and spears and swords and the archers in this film. It's amazing to see that kind of military strength from a smaller group against a larger group, kind of like the 300 in a way. So I really thought the swordplay in this was really good, and I thought Brad Pitt was stellar in this film, especially with regard to not so much the acting prowess, but his interpretation of Achilles. I thought he portrayed Achilles rather well in this film. And of course, Eric Bana was Hector. I thought he did an excellent job too. So I think if you like a lot of war strategy, if you like a lot of adventure and action, this is a very action impacted film with regard to swordplay, um, where it'd be one sword or two swords, a sword and a spear, a sword and a shield. I mean, it was just a lot in this film, and it filled the film, and I really enjoyed that part of it. Um, and of course, a little bit of the Greek mythology that is a part of this too. Um, this is Homer's epic, um, and you have Achilles in here, Hector, as I mentioned, Helen,
Agamemnon, Agamemnon,
and Agamemnon,
the
who's the
king.
major king of everything, and his brother is the one who's actually married to Helen. Um, and you have Odysseus in this film,
Right.
names that you know from Greek mythology. So I just thought I really, really enjoyed this film. I like Sean Bean, who played Odysseus. His role was not very large in the film, but poignant. It's because of him that Hector actually makes this trip, because Hector did not like Agamemnon at
No,
all.
Achilles.
I mean, Achilles, I'm sorry, did not. Well, Hector either.
Hector either. Yeah,
Hector
Hector did not
either.
like him. Mhm.
Hector either, but he was tolerable. He tolerated him early on in the film, but he did not like him. But Hector more so was a person who supposedly should be fighting for the Greek honor, and honor in that realm was not his thing. He was very self-centered individual as is portrayed in the film. But at some point, you understand with his hatred came a lot of his power and his shrewdness. So I would definitely recommend this film um, to anyone, especially if action is your motivator. This film has a ton of it. Yeah, I like Troy. Liked it a lot.
Hmm.
It's
Wow.
it's it's a really good movie. I thoroughly enjoy it too. I know Karen's not very high on the movie.
I saw the movie and I wasn't that impressed with the movie, but it's been a while. Maybe I'll have to just revisit it.
The
But I remember going to the movies to see it and I was disappointed.
you probably it was too long for you in the movie theater.
Probably that too.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't remember the length being the issue. It was more the way in which they conceived the story, and I don't know, because I'm a real fan of Greek mythology too. I grew up reading. I must have read the Odyssey like at least 10 times. Didn't love the Iliad as much, but I read that too, and I just I love Greek mythology, still love it to this day, and I just for some reason that movie just didn't sit right with me.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, and again, I think what I like more than the story, the total storyline, because the storyline was kind of basic, but what I liked, I think, more than that was just the way that they approached the military part of it, and watching how um, the different factions were fighting each other, but also showing each other a little bit of courtesy. We'll say military courtesy, and I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting in this film, especially early on when Hector's character was surrounded and Achilles men, and yet Achilles and Hector talked as opposed to fought more because Achilles felt that you know we're here on your land, we're here to do what we need to do, but he says it. What's the term? He says it something like it's not a quote, but close to that. Um, go back to your wife, go back to your home because it's too early to kill a prince today.
It sounds like a ceasefire to me.
Well, it was basically just saying, yeah, because I think he was ultimately saying when we meet again, it's not going to be pretty and you're not going to win. So
Okay.
you might as well be with your family while you can because if we meet again, I'm going to kill you. That's pretty much what he was saying.
Well, it was also Achilles has. I mean, it's one thing I actually liked about Brad Pitt playing Achilles is Achilles has gone so long as an unstoppable force and not unstoppable through technique or sheer will, but he just is. He's
Because he's
he
immortal, except for that one
well,
little spot.
but it's also one, he has that immortality. Two, he's just is better, and it's there's a vanity to him in the same sense. Even though he is intelligent and he understands family and he understands with the relationships between him, his cousin, um, story wise, the relationship between him and his mother. But he has a vanity on the battlefield where he is untouchable, and the immortality plays into it too. But Brad Pitt radiates that immortality, and when they ransack the church that is on the coast, um,
Apollo.
yeah, when they ransack the Church of Apollo on the coast, and he tells him that there's no need for, or it's too early for princes to die, is because there's not an audience. Is because there's not anyone to bask in Hector's failure when Achilles beats him, and that's the vanity of it. It's too early because I don't want to beat you at this stage because there's nothing, because that nothing comes of this.
Right,
Yeah,
If I
no
beat you
glory.
now, there's
Glory
no
is
glory to it,
everything.
yeah,
and that's what
everything for him was glory.
yes.
He wanted it to be a glorious stage, and the only thing that really convinced him to come was that because here's Achilles' mother telling him two things: either if you stay, you can live a long life and live a glorious life in peace. If you go, you may be heralded as a great warrior, but you'll never come back to me.
Right.
And so he's tried, and she's saying you have a choice here. And the next scene that you see in the film is him on a boat
Right.
on a ship headed for Troy. So
Right, because
obviously his the glory of his name being heralded for years and years, and even us talking about it now,
Right.
is what he wanted. He wanted to be uh, remembered forever,
in
and he
truth,
felt that if he was living in the life that his mother wanted, he would be forgotten.
and
Right.
truth be told, in those days, that wasn't really a choice. If you were a man, you were going to choose war, and you were going to choose the chance to die as a hero in a war and to be remembered, because especially back in those days, no one was expected to have a long life, and the only point of being on earth was to get to some glorious afterlife or heaven or something, either Olympus or some other place other than
Valhalla.
being on earth, because being on
Valhalla.
earth was miserable, um, and a struggle. So yeah, I mean, if you were a young man, it was an honor to go to war, and you hope to die in a glorious battle. That's what you wanted. You probably weren't really looking to come back home. you
Right.
know.
Right.
All right.
And that seems to be maybe not so much in modern warfare, but definitely in ancient warfare and classical warfare. You didn't expect to return. You just hoped that you could
You just
reach
didn't want to
the
embarrass
goal of your
yourself.
task and not
Right.
embarrass your family. Right.
You just didn't want to embarrass yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, on that note, timeout.
Oh God. Okay.
Hey, oh, hey, Greg, I got to call timeout 1 second.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, while my co-hosts are taking a slight break, please do us a favor. Go to our website, or not our website, but our YouTube site under A Real Point of View, and subscribe to our channel. We'd appreciate that. And take a look at our archives of different episodes that we have, talking about a myriad of films that are out there, in hopes to, one, persuade you to see a lot of different films, but also two, to tell you about films that we think would be entertaining to you, and something that we felt that you could have an opportunity to watch and enjoy. That is pretty much our mantra here. And what we're trying to strive to do is to try to get everyone to see as many films as you can, and try to see some wonderful films and alert you to those wonderful films is our real reason why we're here. Um, to critique these films, and for you early on, films that you may have missed in the past, films you may not have been aware of, and also current and upcoming films that you have not seen as of yet. And in order to just help you, dig through and discard some films that might not be what you're looking for. So thank you again for joining us here on A Real Point of View.
Oh,
And
Greg.
again, take advantage of
Greg.
our archive show.
Oh, Greg.
Yes.
I didn't talk about my second film.
I'm not leaving. It's just you guys went away for a second. So
Oh.
as opposed to just having dead air,
Oh.
thought I would talk to our the people who are actually hopefully viewing us, and talking to other people to say, hey, look at this show. This is a good show, and we're
Oh,
hoping
I
that we
thought you
can
were saying good
do
night.
that.
That's usually what you say
I'm
when
alive.
we're leaving.
Oh, I know,
I'm
but
alive.
when you went, you left, and Steve both left. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
I did.
so I didn't think that was polite.
I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
I'm
Greg, I had
sorry.
to get my phone was about to die.
Oh, no worries.
And I'm sorry because there wasn't any way for me to not take that call, and I usually the phone doesn't ring, so.
No worries.
Sorry to all the fans.
Yeah, I was just letting him know about our YouTube channel.
Oh,
Yay!
And also, too, we have some archives on Blog Talk Radio under a real point of view as well. So if you ever get an opportunity to listen to our radio broadcasts from our original broadcast, please do so. There's some good information there from all the different people that have come through as critics on our show. So, Karen, what is your next film?
um, well, my second film is called Dangerous Liaisons, and it's a 1988 film starring John Malkovich, Glenn Close, Keanu Reeves, Michelle Pfeiffer, Swoosie Kurtz. Um, and this is one of my favorite films. I loved this film when it came out in 1988. I remember going to the movies to see it and thoroughly enjoying it. It's based on a book. It's based on a play. The movie was very well regarded when it was released. It did well at the box office, and it was nominated for Best Picture. Didn't win, but it was nominated for Best Picture. Michelle Pfeiffer was nominated for Best Actress. She didn't win. Uh, but Christopher Hampton, I believe, won for Best Screenplay because the screenplay was regarded as really stellar. And Stephen Frears was the director, and the direction was also regarded as quite good. So this movie, I think, has, I mean, if our theme is living by the sword and dying by the sword, this movie has sword play on allegorical as well as physical level. There is definitely a sword fight that I think is very well choreographed. And then there's the constant sword play that happens throughout the movie, but it's a battle of words and wits. So watching that, or listening to that is very interesting because the characters John Malkovich, Glenn Close use their words very carefully, and they use them as weapons. Um, there's one point, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie, where John Malkovich's character, who was Valmont, Count Valmont, says he wants to spend a night with Glenn Close's character, the Marquez, and he says, I intend to have my reward. I'm going, I will not take kindly to being turned away. So what is your answer? And you better decide the right way or else. And she just looks at him and just sort of smiles, a really kind of dangerous smile. And then he says, one word is all that's required. What is it? And so then she kind of smiles again. And so she says, all right. And then he puts out his hand to take her hand so that they can go off to her boudoir. And then she says, war. And it's like, wow, awesome. I love that. So, and they go to war in the worst, like in the most vicious way possible. This is, I mean, you think Mean Girls have it going on these days? They could take lessons from these two. They parlayed social media. I mean, you watch this movie and it's sort of like, wow, the things that people talk about with regard to social media and standing and, popularity and your reputation, that stuff, I mean, there's nothing new about that. They were just as worried about that in the 1700s as people seem to be worried about in the 2000s. And so just watching the way that both of these characters try to manipulate people and lives for their own amusement. To be fair, the people that they were trying to manipulate let themselves be manipulated, which was ridiculous. I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer's character is probably the weakest character um, of all of them, and the least interesting, in my opinion. Um, but she basically, John Malkovich breaks her heart, and I'm like, you didn't have to like let him just do that to you. I mean, there are other fish in the sea, for crying out loud. But anyway, and he wasn't even that cute. Um, so so there was that. But then you get to the sword fight, which is the theme of our show today. Why I Although there wasn't a lot of sword fighting in this movie, even though it keeps showing up on swashbuckling movie list, there's not a lot of sword fighting. But why it deserves to be on the list is because I think this movie goes out of its way to depict sword fighting in a very realistic light. So, and the movies from the 30s, especially the 30s and the 40s, when you have sword fighting, it's basically like fencing lessons. I mean, and when you're fencing, there's a stance that you have, and there are moves that you do, and you can basically, I mean, if you know fencing, you can recognize the moves, and you can see how people are sort of trying to mesh the moves together. So it's not like fighting, it's like the sport. It's really like the sport of fencing. Um, so it looks kind of glamorous because of that. And even though there's fake blood and people die or whatever, it doesn't really feel like that's what they're doing, because because you've got, on guard, parry thrust, and, counter thrust or whatever. And you can see all that happening. What I liked about Dangerous Liaisons is that this was a duel. The sword fighting that took place was due to a duel. And a duel is not at all glamorous. It's exhausting. It's, hard and bloody. And that's the kind of thing that didn't show up even when the duels were taking place within a movie. That kind of stuff didn't always show up. When I was watching this fight, but I won't say which characters were involved, but there's a duel that takes place between two characters. So they're fighting, and they sort of they lunge at each other, and kind of there's a flurry of fighting, and then there's because it's exhausting. So they're breathing really hard, they're falling down, they're running around, one is chasing another one, and then the other guy the other guy is chasing for a while, and it's exhausting. It's literally exhausting. And I like that that's what came out of this, that I like that that's how the sword fighting was portrayed. It wasn't these pretty parries and thrusts. There were these lurches and, kind of stumbling and mistakes, and then there would be some sword fighting, and then there'd be more lurching, and then somebody would fall, or somebody would get scraped, or there'd be like a scratch for blood, but that would, and then they would go back to fighting. So I really like that. That's why I wanted this movie to be one of the movies that I picked. It not your typical sword fighting movie, because there's not a lot of sword fighting. There's only one huge fight, but that fight is definitely worth watching.
So Karen is our resident expert when it comes to swordplay. So um, I'm sure you really enjoyed that more realism as opposed to a more quote unquote staged fighting like in earlier films. So And I think another movie that depicts that is the what's the thing it's called, the the Duelist,
Oh,
where they're fighting different types of swords in that film, and it's just about this film very indirectly. At last, these guys are fighting duels forever, never winning, just fighting all the time. But you see the ex, the exertion of how hard it was just for 3 or 4 minutes of fighting, and whether they were using kind of like an epi or a broadsword or whatever they use. The heavier the sword, the harder it was for them to fight actually. So it was really interesting. So yeah, I like it to be more a realistic look as well. So yeah, I can get into that. I can understand that. Well, that sounds good. It sounds like an interesting movie. I've seen a little bit of the movie. Actually, I haven't seen the whole film, but it sounds like it might be interesting to watch.
yeah, the whole movie is just it's very well done just from, the verbal sword play, and as well as the one physical sword fight that happens. But the play of words and the scheming and the masterminding, and that is just it's delicious to watch.
So that would be kind of what is it? The word is mightier than the sword, as far as the wordplay in the film.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Steve, why don't you give us your film, and your second film? What was that?
My second film is Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, the first one in the series for Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, Johnny Depp, Jeffrey Rush, Keira Knightley, Orlando Bloom. It really, you know, had an all-star cast, but Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom, even though they had been in, um, you know, good movies up to that point, they hadn't really, become the names that we really know them as today. Although
Hmm.
Johnny Depp being very well established and Jeffrey Rush being just Jeffrey Rush, awesome. So I like him as an actor. He's awesome.
I can tell.
Um,
I heard the word awesome.
yeah, but the movie takes place kind of in the early 18th century. It really does deal with the pirate swashbuckling style. Johnny Depp actually said at one point when describing the reasoning behind his character is when he went back and looked and did his kind of research on it. He viewed them like rock stars,
Hmm.
and they did kind of carry that sort of 70s 80s style rock star mantra of all the drinking, all the partying, all the things. And that was the stories that you heard all the time. So the way he did his character, the way he moved, the way he was nonchalant, the way he always seemed like it didn't matter, how at what given point in time you saw him, he looked drunk all the
Hmm.
time. And that's really how he viewed him. Uh, he viewed his character and wanted to play it that way. And it really showed as this movie has its dark, undertone moments,
Hmm.
but still he's able to keep it just comedically bright enough. And the character of Jack Sparrow, you can't really tell, but there's a certain intelligence to the madness that's going on inside his head all the time. I
Hmm.
mean, when we first get to the movie, there's a ship rolling, sailing around Port Royal, Jamaica, and they come to a shipwreck where the only survivor is one small boy, and they pull him on board. And the first one to get to him is uh, a governor's daughter, who is Elizabeth Swan, uh, which is Keira Knightley later in the film, but she finds a golden pirate medallion on his neck, and in order what she thinks will save his life, she takes the necklace from him so that the soldiers that are on the ship don't mistake him for a pirate because it wasn't it wasn't crazy at the time for kids to be working on pirate ships, cleaning and doing other things, and would be participating just like a natural pirate would. So they would be hung or shot or executed just like a normal pirate would be during that period of time. So she's in order to protect him. But as they look up, they see a ship fading into the fog, and it's got the black sails of a pirate ship as they're going. And then it spans to years later, and you see the first real glimpse of Jack in all his glory that we get at the very beginning is there's a ship coming into the port, and he's standing at the very top of the main mast, and it's just he's riding the ship, and it's the wind is like brushing past him, and the flags are going, and what you can't tell is the ship is sinking into the water as he's coming into port, and right perfectly timed as it's just the so you have something to look forward to of his character, of how many times can he do stuff like this. The ship sails, and he steps right off onto the
Pier.
yeah, steps right off onto the pier as the ship is going down into the water. It's like and it's just so perfect, and he starts walking. He ends up getting recognized as a pirate and is called the the worst pirate that has ever been heard of, by Commodore Norrington, or Norrington, who at the beginning of this movie has been promoted to Commodore. He calls him the worst pirate he's ever heard of, where Jack identifies, but you have heard of me.
Right.
So,
There it is, right there.
but I am famous, and you know it.
Right.
Just that, again, we talked about
Vanity.
Achilles, of vanity in a
Mhm.
character. Well, Jack ends up escaping in the most ridiculous way possible, and he ends up in a blacksmith shop where he encounters Will Turner. And Will Turner, believing he's doing the right thing, tries to stop Jack because he knows he's a pirate. And then this is our first real taste of the swashbuckling and the sword fighting that comes in this movie. And it may be choreographed, and it may seem like it's just more fantastic, but it feels like an old story is being told, like someone's telling you the story, and they're like, yeah, they were up in the rafters and they were fighting, and they fell down, and there's this goat that got branded and ended up running somebody over, and they couldn't get to him. It was just utter insanity, and it feels like you're being told this eccentric, amazing story as you're watching this movie go on. Well, it ends up uh, Jack gets captured, but not before Elizabeth, who is, women wore corsets were widely worn by women at the time, and evidently, if you were able to breathe, you weren't wearing a corset correctly.
Right.
So
That would be correct.
while Commodore Norrington is trying to propose to Elizabeth, who he's known for such a long time, when she was a child, which doesn't make this weird at all, she ends up falling into the water. And when she falls into the water, a big, almost like sonar goes off in the water that you see, and it spreads all across the ocean. And it comes from the gold medallion. And Jack ends up saving her, which leads to the chase. And then, oh, sorry, I got lost there for a second. My bad. I disappeared on my own adventure. And so they come, they capture Jack. They put him in jail. Well, the signal has reached these pirates, and they come to shore, and they start attacking, and they start pillaging, and they start killing, and they start doing what pirates do best. And they end up confronting Elizabeth because they know she has the medallion. They can sense it, they can feel it, and they capture her. And she once she gets on the ship, she negotiates with Jeffrey Rush's character, Captain Barbosa, which, of every single Pirates of the Caribbean, all the movies and everything, Barbosa feels the most like, if you were to think a pirate was, you could picture them. He seems like that guy. He's just a commanding you know, commanding, kind of inspiring, just guy that he's a leader. He looks like a leader, even though he's a pirate,
Hmm.
and he really he gives off that aura about him, and it's Jeffrey Rush. So, uh, well,
Yeah,
she
no
makes
bias
a deal.
there.
Say what?
No bias
No bias.
there.
No bias. No bias whatsoever. None. Zero. So they find out that the pirates took some gold from an island called the Isle de Morta, and it's Hernando Cortez, I believe, is the name. Hernanin Cortez, and who was actually a conquistador that was led an expedition that was responsible for the fall of the Aztec Empire.
Mhm.
And the Aztecs placed a curse on this gold. So when Cortez took it, when they took the gold, they were cursed for the 882 pieces of gold, and they could never die. They could never taste food again. They could never taste wine. They could never feel the sun. And in the moonlight, it showed them for what they really were, which these skeletal, just dead figures. And so it plays into an old style of mythology to when the world wasn't as discovered as it is now, when there were still secrets out there, and again with people telling these extravagant stories.
Mhm.
And and then it just follows Elizabeth gets captured by the pirates. It follows Jack and Will going and making deals and doing all these crazy stunts and even stealing a ship and getting their own pirate crew together to go try to get Elizabeth back. And when you get to the end of the movie, we finally reach our climax with Jack and Barbossa having their sword fight, and it's really everything you wanted it to be for the story.
Okay.
And it's elaborate, it's extravagant. They're fighting all over this cavern, and they do such good, back and forth between each other because they've known each other so long, and it the sword fighting is good. The hilarious scenes mixed in with the kind of darker scenes really go very well together. And overall, it's a really good movie. And all of these movies set up for another one, but they do a good job with the setup for if they wanted it ended there, it could be a great movie ended there.
Hmm.
Very cool.
So, so
Yeah,
Nice.
I actually like the series. I haven't seen all the movies. I've seen three of them, and I actually liked all three.
the first
Um,
three,
the first three, yeah.
the
I
first three.
only like the first one.
I feel like the second one and the first one are the superior two movies of the entire series. I like Stranger Tides because it has Ian McShane, and I love him as an actor. So,
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about Johnny Depp as an actor anymore. I really liked him in the first movie, but it's like a little of that character goes a long way for me personally.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I guess Johnny Depp and Freddie Mercury for Karen, I guess.
Well, real quick, I got a couple little things. Just one little thing, if you really want. It was Jack Sparrow was actually written for Hugh Jackman, and
Wow.
that's the reason he was called Jack.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and the reason they didn't go with Hugh Jackman was because they figured outside of Australia he wouldn't carry, enough of a name to be at that point in time.
At that point in time, where
Yeah,
as ironically now he can.
right.
But well, I'm glad because I liked Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. In my opinion, again, the Jack Reacher films,
Hmm.
um, the actual books that I read actually describe this I'm sorry, the description in the book fits Hugh Jackman almost to a T.
Hmm.
Um, and not Tom Cruise. But not saying that Tom Cruise did a bad job; he did a good job. But I just see in my mind's eye, Hugh Jackman would have been a perfect, um, in my mind, uh, leading man for both those Jack Reacher films. But that's just me. All
I
right.
agree.
Well, hey everybody, I appreciate you guys. hanging out with me and giving us your renditions of the swashbuckler to live and die by the sword. And we appreciate you guys out there too, who are out there listening to us talk about these films. Thanks
Can I
again for
mention one
watching.
thing before we
Except
get going?
that we're not leaving yet, as I'm thinking. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, can I just mention one more thing?
Sure.
Since Steve had one little thing, I have one little thing too.
Okay.
The Captain Horatio Hornblower. I don't know if people know this, but Gregory Peck was not the first choice to play Captain Horatio Hornblower. Actually, he was the third choice.
What?
The first choice to play Captain Horatio Hornblower was Errol Flynn,
What?
but Errol Flynn was on a downturn. He was boffo box office. He was like top of the box office in the late 30s, early 40s. But by 1948, I mean, remember, Hornblower came out in 51. By 1948, he was definitely on a kind of a downward
Spiral.
spiral as far as box office goes. So he had made a movie called The Adventures of Don or Adventures of Don Juan that had just totally bombed at the box office. So the studio's like, we can't put him in Captain Horatio Hornblower. Then the second choice was Burt Lancaster.
What?
But amazingly enough, they said Warner Brothers said, "Well, we think he can't really. He his range doesn't quite extend to Captain Horatio Hornblower. He's not going to be able to carry that off," which I just find really ironic, given that he's played so many
Wonderful
characters like
characters. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in his career. But at that point in time, I'm like, nah. Well, we'll go with Greg.
Which didn't
So
hurt me or upset me at all.
right.
Gregory Peck's one of my favorite actors, and Horatio Hornblower. Yep, just another good film for me, for him. Top, one of the top ones for Gregory Peck, and obviously To Kill a Mockingbird, and also Big Country. So, yeah, big fan, big fan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I try to end this show again for the third time, I think, we do appreciate you guys hanging out with us, and hopefully we won't have as many technical difficulties the next time that we venture to bring you some more and interesting films. So, thanks again for joining us here at A Real Point of View. We appreciate you and have a wonderful night and enjoy a movie this weekend. And hopefully, some of the films that we mentioned tonight and hopefully introduced you to and or reminded you of will give you the impetus to go out there and see them again or see them for the first time. So, thanks again and take care, Karen, and take care, Steve. And from all of us here at A Real Point of View, thank you and good night.
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 Night.